Hello, everybody. Welcome to another live stream here from AutoCrit. I am so excited to talk about sagging middles. And I know some of you might be thinking, oh, is this like a way to lose weight? Well, unfortunately not. I am not a health expert. I'm not going to tell you how to lose weight, but I am going to help you make the middle of your book stronger. I get this question a lot. How do I keep the momentum going in my book? How do I keep the readers interested once I've established what the protagonist is concerned about and what the obstacles are? Like, how do I keep that momentum going? And so we're going to talk about it. And I know I've seen people here and they're saying that this is timely. Look at that. See, perfect. Approaching the middle of your work in progress. That is fantastic. So I wanted to know from you, what are some of the concerns that you have with middles? So please go ahead and comment, and I will try to. I'll try to get to all those points as we go through today. But I have a couple of comments that I would like to make that should help you avoid a sagging middle. That's the last thing we need. A sagging middle can keep people from finishing your story, and it's not good because it's the last thing you want when you give somebody your work to read as a beta reader or somebody buys it and then they just never finish it. They won't leave you a review. They won't give you any comments. It can be terrible for you as an artist because you just don't know, what's even broken. Things like that. It looks like Celissa already has a question. Yes, you are too afraid that if you add excitement in the middle, you won't have anything for the end. Okay, we're going to get to that. That is a good point. Right here. Did you start too intense? This is something that can be a concern, right? Did you actually begin? Let's not even talk about making the middle too intense and exciting. Did you actually kind of start your beginning too exciting? We're told a lot as artists, you got to get attention, right? You got 5 seconds, you got 10 seconds, you got 10 pages, whatever it is, right? And so you want to like ratchet it up to an 11. And then it's like, where do you go? So it could be that, yeah, you actually did, in fact, begin your story too intense. You did not give yourself somewhere to go, right? Without getting ridiculous. If in the first page, it's an asteroid is going to come to the Earth to destroy it, it's like, well, what do you do to ratchet it up? Of course, there are ways to handle that specific situation. So I'm not saying you can't do that. I'm just saying it can paint you into a little bit of a corner, particularly if you're not clever enough about it. So yeah, ask yourself, what were the promises you made to the reader up front? I like to talk about promises a lot. The first act, that first section of the story, all the way up to what is commonly called like the catalyst or the call to adventure moment. That's where you are making promises to the audience. This is the story you're going to sign up for, everybody. This is why you should keep reading. Okay. And if you kind of like over promise, if you're like, oh, this is going to be like the best thing ever, right? And then you have to kind of delay on the delivery of it, you can have a sagging middle because you're not just promising how cool the ending is going to be, right? You are promising the whole story. I think some people kind of miss that. So I'm going to kind of restate that. When you do that catalyst moment, that call to adventure where the main character has to decide, yes, I want to begin this story. Okay, well, the promise to the reader is not just that, well, at the end of the story, there's going to be this amazing battle where everything comes together. That's true, but we're also getting a promise that the journey in between those things is going to be interesting as well, right? So if you start too intense about how exciting that's going to be, you can, like I said, ratchet up to that 11, and then you're flatlining. And flatlining excitement is not much different than flatlining boredom. Right? Because if everything is exciting, then nothing is exciting. So you have to be very careful about that. All right. If you start in the middle, all you have to work towards is the end. That's actually not a bad point. And we're going to get to the concept of perhaps starting in the middle as a way to solve this problem a little bit later. So are stakes raised, right? I don't mean like lifting up a T-bone, of course. Are the emotional or plot stakes, the conflict stakes, did anything change? Or like I said, did you flatline? Did you decide that what's at stake is the fate of the whole world, and then you just froze? Now, if you wanted to start out like that, let's say that's your bold opening, like this is a disaster film. I think of things like, Armageddon or Deep Impact or something like that. Okay. Can you start your story where the whole world is in jeopardy from the get-go? Yes, you can. So how do you raise the stakes? You raise the stakes by making the audience more emotionally invested in who's involved. So what's at stake in something like, Armageddon, I've never seen the movie actually, so forgive me, but I believe that the plot of that movie involves a spaceship going to actually affect the asteroid, right? And so then what we care about are the people on that rescue mission, right? So the stakes are raised because we're concerned about their life. And it's not that we're not concerned about the life of everybody else on Earth, but we're not as concerned because we just don't know them, right? So you can go deeper in terms of the emotional stakes and make them worse. Let's imagine something that isn't quite as dramatic as that. Okay, so let's say it's a mystery, right? Mysteries can be challenging to raise stakes because you'll start with a mystery, and it's very obvious what the point of the story is, right? It's this person was murdered, who did it, right? And so then it's like, well, then where do you go? Isn't it just a delay for the answer? Well, no, a good mystery will make the implications of the mystery bigger than you thought. There's a reason why it matters that the mystery is solved. There's a reason why it matters to the detective why if they can't solve the mystery, perhaps there's personal jeopardy involved. There's ramifications of who committed the crime that could cause a lot of turmoil. There's more things going on under the surface, right? The stakes don't have to be raised in the sense of you start solving a mystery, right? And then halfway through it, it's like, well, now there's 20 people murdered, and if we don't solve it, everybody in the world will be murdered, right? You don't have to go that extreme. I think we all understand that. But you can also, like I said, just go deeper without even adding extra problems in terms of big problems, right? The big problem can stay the same, but the stakes can be higher. So the big problem can still just be, we don't know who murdered this person, but the stakes could be, well, if we can't solve that, therefore, what does that mean, right? Or now that we've solved it, therefore, and what does that mean? And that can make the story more compelling and more interesting in the meantime. One way too, like just talking about mystery, mysteries on the brain right now, is that you could have it where the difficulty of solving the mystery becomes more and more impossible to figure out. The clues become more and more confusing. And so the stakes are raised in a sense because the difficulty level of actually accomplishing what the protagonist set out to do has been raised, right? It went from being something that might be difficult to something that seems impossible. All right, so let's go to the next point here. Go deeper. Yes, this is essentially what I was getting at with the stakes, right? But just go deeper. You don't even necessarily have to add a new element. And I do caution against that. Sometimes the way that artists think that you solve this problem is just by throwing everything in the kitchen sink at something, right? And while that can be compelling, often that's not as helpful as getting more detail about what we've already established. I think of the author Brandon Sanderson, right? And he has his laws of magic, and one of his laws is before you introduce new magic, you go deeper in what you've already established. And I think this is really true just in general, right? The emotional stakes of somebody, like you start the story. Let's imagine it's a sports story, right? And you started out and they're kind of struggling and they really want to be the grand champion in some event. Okay. And then ultimately what you're going to do is tread water. We all kind of know where that story is going to go. It's probably going to result in them overcoming the odds, doing some great feat, and then winning. So, it's very easy to end up in a slump. So what generally those stories do well is they go deeper. They go into the psychology of the person. What is holding them back? Why can't they be the winner now? And it gets very psychoanalytical, right? There's some major flaw they need to overcome. There is trauma, whatever it is. And because we just go deeper, it's not like you have to introduce more elements. It's not like, well, they wanted to be the champion of this event, but actually they have to be the champion of this event and this event and this event. No, everything is still what was established at the beginning, but we just care about it all that more because we've gotten more detail about it. And often things, we didn't even know. We didn't really know what was holding back the athlete. And then when we find out what was holding them back, well, now we care about them all the more. We root for them all the more. And again, the odds of them winning has lowered. We're more concerned they may not pull it off, as it were. This is good. Could this be deeper into the B story? What a great segue. You're perfect at this. Yes, subplots. You can, in fact, use subplots to delay the satisfaction of the main plot. And that shouldn't be the only reason they exist, of course, but from a mechanical standpoint, they can serve that purpose. Now, one reason why we're doing that is in the main plot, the main character, the protagonist, has something they want. There is an antagonist, an obstacle stopping them. If we get them past that obstacle quickly, the implication is that obstacle was not that much of an obstacle. It might even feel like, it's kind of arbitrary. So they have to level up. So how do they level up? Well, one way is by actually facing the obstacle, but often it's not. It's a subplot. It's something else, and it allows them to become a more integrated person, or whatever you want to say, and they learn something, and that benefits them for the purpose of getting past the antagonist. So, for example, a mystery plot. You could imagine it's an athlete, right? Okay. And they're trying to become the best at something, the world champion at something. But the mystery plot could be, it just seems like no matter what I can do, I can't get faster than that other person. What are they doing right? Okay, so that's a mystery plot. And you could resolve that in a whole bunch of different ways. Maybe that plot gets resolved where actually the other person is cheating. And now the person has to decide, well, will I do the same thing? Will I cheat as well? Or will I not? And over, and they have to face kind of their own personal concern with winning versus doing it properly, right? That could be something. Or it could be they literally have to get over themselves, right? The other character does some technique and they're like, yeah, but I just don't do things like that. And somebody eventually has to shake them to their senses and say, well, no, actually consider doing it that way. Why don't you do it that way? And then, they have that growth. But that all came from a subplot, right? Where they had to figure out something else that was related, but only tangentially related, right? Okay, something like a romance. Romance subplots are common, and I guess I should say romance/relationship, right? Because the most common B plot is either the character falls in love with somebody or the character develops love for somebody in a friendship sense, a camaraderie or something like that. And the reason why is because through other people, they often learn the things they need to learn to get past the antagonist. It also tells us something more about them as a person besides their diligent efforts at getting to getting past the obstacle, right? They're not just a unithinker, right? The only thing that and they could even come across like that, but then the romance actually forces them not to be. And that can be helpful. It also can keep the plot from being too monotonous. Now, subplots have the danger of taking over, right? Mystery plots, romance plots, all of these can start to make the story feel like something that you didn't sign up for. So you do have to be careful. But like I said, they can serve the purpose of delaying the satisfaction of what you're promising the audience at the beginning while leveling up the main characters so that they're ready to get past the obstacle. Now, the final one I have here is distraction. These are not all the subplots, but these are the top 3 that I tend to see. And distraction is something happens that throws the protagonist off what they want in life, right? So they start the story being like, imagine, let's just keep to the athlete, right? The athlete's like, I want to be the world's best at something, right? But then the distraction comes in and it's like, well, do you really want to be the best at that? Or do you really want to be famous? Right? Just famous in general. And then they might start, signing up for all these ad deals. And then it starts to kind of take away from their diligence. And then it might even threaten the whole thing they set out to do at the beginning. Right? And see, that can be something that, again, tells you something about the main character because they have to you have to face what it was that was motivating them to the goal in the first place. Were they motivated by a sense of self-worth, like they want to do it for themselves, or are they doing it for the acceptance of others, or things like that, right? And it gets into those sort of psychological questions. And then an alien ship lands. I mean, yes, the danger with a distraction plot is you can end up kind of giving the audience a 180 from what you promised them. So if you promise them this is a feel-good motivational athletic story and all of a sudden it becomes a sci-fi story, they might be rather disappointed in you. And it can also feel quite a bit desperate. Like why are you throwing in such a weird element? Is it just because you got bored with what you were talking about? So something to keep in mind for sure. All right, moving on. Other worldviews. A way that you can make your middle more interesting is by throwing in other worldviews that you haven't established. And I say that versus more characters. So you could, of course, just add characters, but what you don't want to do is add characters that think the same as the characters you have already, because what purpose are they serving? Really not. They're just kind of clones. What you want are characters that could throw friction or other perspectives into the mix. So this can take all different kinds of forms, right? It could be a character that starts to think badly about what the main character wants and puts doubt in their mind about whether or not they should even do it. It could be a character that puts doubt in the mind if they can achieve what they want. It could be a character that has a different way of wanting to go about doing what they want, right? Religion. Yeah, there's so many different things, right? Ways to go deeper about all different kinds of topics for sure. This the solution to most pacing issues is add more conflict. It's true, right? And this is often where that worldview comes from. That's going to be compelling, right? Of course, you can add another worldview that agreed completely. Well, it wouldn't even be another worldview. You could add another character that just completely agrees with the protagonist, but that's not going to be very interesting. Again, that's just a clone. You'd want at least a little bit of a difference. Wherever that little bit of a difference is conflict. It can be subtle. I'm not saying that you have to bring in somebody who's going to like debate the whole thing and the rest of the book becomes one big argument. But even it could just be subtly different, right? They're just as driven as the protagonist, but their perspective is askew enough that it rubs a little bit against what the protagonist wants to do. Yes, mentors are great as well, for sure. Same kind of thing. Mentors often present a different worldview. And again, it's not completely different. It's not dramatically different. Think of something like Obi-Wan Kenobi's kind of the classic mentor, right? It's not like he thinks the Empire is good, but he gives Luke more information about the Force, and he has a much more religious perspective on what is going on. And Luke is a little bit more kind of cynical and blah about it, right? People are talking about killing somebody. We're going to get there. Unexpected team ups. So this could be fun. So this is not a new worldview. This is somebody at the beginning of your story that has a worldview that is quite different than the main character, and you wouldn't imagine they'd ever have to work together, end up having to work together. This is often why the B plot comes in at this point, and it becomes relationship. It becomes the buddy cop story. It becomes the romance, the hate to love sort of thing. It's pretty common. It works well, though, because what it shows you is the main character's growth in the situation. Somebody that they thought of as an enemy turns out to be an ally, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a way to shake things up, shake the box in terms of who's involved. So think about that. When you get to that middle, think of who are the characters you set up and ask yourself, who would kind of be the worst person in this situation because they would end up just being kind of friction and would add a whole lot of tension. Can I make it where they have to be involved somehow? And maybe you could say, well, I don't have that right now, but I'm going to write as if I have a reason just because that's so much fun and I'm going to do it. And then you can go back and you can fix it. You can give them a skill that the main character just so happens to need or something like that. And yes, is that a little contrived? Of course, but this is fiction after all. Everything is contrived. We're making this all up. All right. More obstacles equals more growth, right? So you probably will not have the protagonist face against the exact obstacle multiple times. Not the exact one. And the reason why is because the more they can face it and come across unscathed, the less imposing it is. Usually, you come across the big obstacle of the story once, so you can get past it. Or not, if you have either a tragedy or a story where the character isn't supposed to get what they want and the obstacle actually serves serves a greater purpose to help them, and there's a pivot. But most stories, they do get what they want, or they get what the audience knows that they need, I should say that, and that's often established at the beginning of the story that we know that, and they get past the obstacle. However, like I said, that doesn't happen until the end of the story. So how do you level them up and get them ready for the obstacle if they're not facing it over and over? Usually there are proxy obstacles that are very similar. They make the character have to learn the things they're going to need to learn to get past the main obstacle. Now, this doesn't mean the exact same thing in the exact same way, right? So you could do a sports movie where the main character, let's say they want to be, the fastest runner in the world, right? And so an obstacle could just be other runners along the way, and then there's the big runner at the end who's like the best runner in the world, right? But in the meantime, they have little victories. Sure, you could do that, but you could also establish that maybe one of their biggest issues is some sort of doubt about themselves or something like that. And so then they do more abstract things to overcome that doubt in themselves. Like they end up having to sing at a karaoke party or something. And sometimes that can feel a little contrived, but there's a little like, wax on, wax off sort of thing. But a lot of times that actually makes it more fun, right? Because we can predict what the big obstacle is because you've already established it a lot of the time. We at least have a sense of what it is. But what we don't know are what the proxy obstacles might be. And the proxy obstacles could be all kinds of fun things that, as long as they make sense, as long as they're related and they help the protagonist do something that's going to grow them towards the main obstacle, they won't just feel random. Now, where you have a danger is yes, if you just throw in random obstacles that don't seem to have to do with anything, then you'll just feel contrived and you'll feel like you're wasting the audience's time and the story's wandering, right? If all of a sudden in the middle of the athlete wanting to be the best runner in the world story, he was robbed and he has to go to the police and he doesn't really like answering personal questions, they has to overcome that, and that's like, okay, but what does having to reveal personal information yourself have to really do with running? And then it could just feel like you just went off the rails and you were just coming up with something so something interesting would happen, and you don't want to do that. So yes, proxy obstacles, not random obstacles, for the purpose of growth. Do not drop the antagonist, though. So one thing that can happen is, okay, like I said, you do not want the main character going against the antagonist until the end of the story, right? Because if they keep going against the antagonist doesn't seem very imposing. Because how can you constantly fail against the obstacle and just be all right? Right? There should be a high level of stakes that if you lose against the antagonist, it's a devastating loss, right? In most stories. I'm not saying this is every story, but in most stories. So what you do is you bring up the antagonist. And this is not the same thing as having them present in the scene. You have the person mention them, think about them. You see the ripple effects. Sports, I'm using the sports analogy a lot, so just forgive me. But one reason why is because sports movies are pretty archetypical. They're quite easy to see what's going on, right? There's not a lot of things hiding. They're pretty straightforward. But one thing you'll notice is what happens a lot in sports movies, right? They're training and then they watch what the other person is doing. The other person has some great victory. The other person gives an interview where they're like, I'm going to beat that person, right? They watch the training of that person and they're like, wow, that's amazing. They're constantly brought up even though they're not physically present in the same spot and they're not actually facing off with each other. But what it does is it establishes that, okay, I'm waiting for it. And it keeps whetting the appetite. So people are really excited for that final battle. So just because you don't want the characters at odds like all the time doesn't mean that it just, you just distract the audience with a bunch of obstacles. you should still frame it within the context of the antagonist as much as you can. Another way that you can do it is you can show the effect of the antagonist. This is common in like creature feature sort of stories. So it's not that rare that the main character doesn't exactly come too much in contact with the big monster until the very end. There might be kind of ripple effects, or they get kind of close, but not quite, but they don't get like a full on confrontation till the end. But what they'll see often are the effects. They'll come across the dead body of the person. They will chase them and they'll just get away and things like that, right? So different ways of handling this. But the point is do not forget about the antagonist. Don't let that tension just fizzle, right? It needs to be predominantly on the audience's mind what the big obstacle is, even if the obstacle is not currently in that scene. There's a term, this is a literary term, or you want to say like a story theory term, option lock or time lock. Okay. So this is a kind of this is a way for you to think about how the problem is solved and what is ratcheting up the tension. So you either generally have characters have a bunch of different ways that they could get past the big obstacle, and then their options dwindle. So they try this and it's bad, and they try this and it's bad. And so what you see are the walls are closing in, right? Or you can have what's called a time lock, which is they must get past the obstacle before the window closes or they have no chance. Okay? The ticking clock, it's called in literary terms. Both of these are valid options, or you can even do both of them. The point is once you've established what these are, you've got to remind the audience of it. Do not establish a ticking clock at the beginning of the story and then forget to remind the audience. For example, if the beginning of the story is in 4 days, an asteroid's going to hit the Earth. Well, then ever so often it should be like, it's happening in 3 days. It's happening in 2 days. It's happening in an hour. It's happening in 6 hours. It's happening in the next 5 minutes, whatever it is. Usually it's like the last second that it gets solved, right? Because it's more exciting. It's like a Galaxy Quest where the countdown goes all the way down to 1 second and it like can't go further because it's not designed to do that. But yeah, exactly, right? But if it's option lock, it's a little bit easier to let that drop. I feel like people get time lock well, but option lock they don't. How you do option lock is you have to think old school Sierra adventure games. I'm going a little nerdy on you, or things of that nature. So back in the 80s, people used to play these games, and you'd have a little inventory bucket. There's still games that kind of work like this, but you have a little inventory bucket. I mean, even Minecraft, you have that kind of thing. So what you do is you say, all right, how am I going to get past this situation? What's in my inventory bucket? And then you're like, well, I tried this, and gradually it starts to narrow down. And what you kind of have to do is similar to how you play those games, but you have to do it for the audience. You have to remind them what's in the inventory. You have to remind them like kind of what's been tried and what's not. And you have to do it fairly subtly. You can't be like super on the nose about it, or it's a little bit annoying, but you have to figure out a way to bring up to the audience that it's like, oh yeah, they really have tried like everything and nothing has worked. Like, that's bad, because what it does is it ratchets up the tension, right? It's also a way to make the middle more interesting, because if you start the middle where it's like, well, it could be this or that or that or that, well, now the audience is like, and they have things to think about, right? And they're like, and you've kind of guideposted them as to what's coming next. So it's like, oh, we're going to check out that. Mysteries do this often with suspects, right? It's like, well, it could be this person or this person or this person or this person. And so then you're like watching and you're seeing, okay, they're going to whittle down, right? And the options are going to get less and less. And the point with the mystery often is that as the options get less and less, it seems more and more impossible for you to solve it, because it seems stranger and stranger that the clues would really add up to anybody, because it seems like the clues are counterintuitive or things like that. Do not throw a lot of numbers. No, I'm not saying like, think of it like in the pure sense of like, they have 20 apples and it's like, well, they tried 19 apples. Maybe the 20th apple worked. No, I don't mean like that. I really mean options, right? What are different things that they could have done? So like let's go back to the sports metaphor. hopefully I'm not or torturing this, but in the sports movie, what it'll be is like they'll try this training strategy, and I'm like, they'll try that training strategy, and they'll try that training strategy. That's often how it will manifest itself. All right, let's move on. Consider a moral dilemma. Should the main character even be doing what they're doing? Right? That's a great thing to do. A moral crisis can make a middle much more interesting. Now, sometimes you want to hold off until the end to do this, right? Sometimes you want to wait until they're almost to the lowest point to realize that maybe what they're doing isn't the best idea. But sometimes you want to throw it in earlier because it can be interesting. They thought that it's a very simple situation. It's very black and white. These are the good guys, these are the bad guys. And then they realize, actually, it's a little more complicated than that, and I'm not exactly sure what to do. Consider that. If you find that the middle is a little flat, maybe your story is a little flat in that it's a little simplistic. Maybe there are more moral implications to what are going on, and you're just not exploring them for sure. Consider a twist, secret reveal. Now, those of you who watch this live stream a lot are going to be like, Daniel, you're always bashing secrets. Why are you telling me to write a secret? And this is one of those rules. It's not a blanket rule. Generally speaking, secrets, big twists like that are tricky to write because up until the secret is revealed, the audience is being deceived. And so the question is how is the audience going to feel when the deception is revealed? Are they going to think, oh, that makes everything a lot more interesting, and that's cool. And the fact that I didn't know up to this point actually made that a lot more interesting. Or are they going to think, I really wish I would have known this the whole time? Or are they going to think, I actually liked it better before I knew this? You don't want the latter two, right? But there are secrets that you can do that up until the secret, the story is better for having the secret. And then after the story, after the secret is revealed, the story is better for having the secret. I would say Star Wars is one of the most famous examples of this, where the revelation about Luke's father does not hurt the up to that point, but it just strengthens it going forward. And that's basically the midpoint of the entire trilogy, right? That's when all of a sudden the stakes change. And we also can see a different ending. You wouldn't watch A New Hope and assume that Darth Vader's redemption could be part of the story. By the time you get to the middle, you at least have that more as a possibility in your head, right? And so when it comes in the end, it's not a complete shock. And essentially, it also creates a little bit of a moral dilemma because not only it's not as simple as just, well, Darth Vader is evil. There's a connection there that gives it some moral flavor that makes it more interesting. Do not drop secrets out of nowhere that make no sense. No, please don't do that. That's just contrivance, right? That's back to making up random obstacles that don't need to be there. We don't need to just add random elements just because. No, I agree with that, of course. Does a secret look like a Deus Machina if not done right? Yes, just like KIC Medina said, yes. That is correct. It can. It's not exactly because the Deus Machina, is a hand of the gods to fix something usually, but it's kind of like the opposite of that. That's the other thing too. Secrets revealed that make the problem a lot worse are generally more received than secrets that make the problem better. And I've said this many times, but it's worth repeating. Humans are more likely to accept something random, seemingly random or coincidental that's negative than positive. And that's because we are cynics. We are more and you can try this out. Don't just believe me. Go to your friends and tell them an outlandish story that's positive and an outlandish story that's negative, and you're going to find they're going to be more likely to believe the negative one. That is my opinion. But I'm not a psychologist. I just stayed at a Holiday Inn Express last night. All right, brainstorm bad middles. This is like, why would you do that? If you're really stuck, ask yourself what you don't want to do. What would be the worst possible idea? Why? Sometimes it can just get you unstuck. Sometimes instead of trying to write well, you just write bad on purpose. And you're like, this sounds very counterintuitive. But it actually does work. One reason why is because it just kind of clears the air. It allows you, to some degree, you have to allow yourself to write badly. You're going to fix it. This is often a first draft problem. But even if it's not, if your first draft is lousy, that's fine. But allow yourself to write badly. Sometimes what you'll find is that your bad middle that you wrote on purpose to be bad, it's really not that bad. It's kind of interesting. But other times, what it tells you is what you could do right, because you're going to look at it and can ask yourself, okay, why is this bad? And then you will realize, oh, because I didn't solve this, I didn't solve this, I didn't solve this. It's just kind of random, etc. Should a secret be foreshadowed or hinted at earlier? I think generally they work better like that, but that depends on how deceived you want the audience to be. There are secrets where there is not really a way that you could figure it out in advance and it still works. But I will say, often, if the audience can go back and they can see, there's a difference between everything up to that point actually would have deceived you because it doesn't actually fit the secret. Some people felt like that with Frozen, where the main character, the guy has the to turn at the end, and they're like, if you look at his actions up to that point, it doesn't really fit somebody without motivation, so it's just a cheat. Fair enough. But on the other hand, there's a way you could do it where the audience just doesn't have enough information to know what the secret was, and the secret doesn't actually conflict with anything that the character did, and that can be fine. Often people like to feel like they could have guessed it, though, because it does tend to feel less cheaty, but I can't say that that's never the case. You brainstorm bad stuff all the time. Yes, I think that's really great. I always write a lot of info dumps and have to sort them out. That's fine. Yeah, I mean, this is the sort of thing you have to allow for, right? You don't need to I'm sure you don't, but you don't have to beat yourself up and be like, oh no, I'm writing an info dump. It's like, it's a first draft. Of course you're writing an info dump, right? Of course it's garbage. If you look at first drafts, there are artists that will reveal their first drafts, or it's a little bit easier often to look at working scripts of movies than it is working books, what books looked like before they reached the editor's desk. Some famous authors, I can tell you, are highly reliant on their editors. But screenplays, you can find earlier drafts. Look at the earliest draft of Star Wars. It is not the same, and it is not as good, and there were a lot of improvements. The art of writing is really the art of rewriting. It really is. It is sculpture with words. It is. And starting with that cement block, it might look really ugly, and that's fine, but it gives you something to start from so you can carve out what it is that you want to do. And some info dumps, of course, are necessary. Yes. I like to try to give nuanced advice. Now, consider the setting. This is a little more subtle, but sometimes what can make something sag is just a repetition. So consider whether or not you need to change the scenery. Now, typically you will find that after the call to adventure moment, the setting does change, right? They go somewhere. And that's one reason why, is because it puts the main character in a different context. But even if they are stuck, often the setting changes in their own mind because they have a new context for the setting. But if you are stuck, you should look at whether or not you've just done too many things in the same location, because what that means is you're treading water. The character is not allowed to grow because, well, this is how they always are, right? If you start like an athletic story, right? Almost inevitably, you'll find they'll end up moving. And it's for just random reasons. They'll just change location. And for training or something. And it's just because, well, they've got to shake the box. If what they're doing right now isn't working, well, they're going to do something different. If they're going to do something different, it's going to require a different location. So I think we all understand this, and I think we all do this to some extent, but just consider how much the setting is shaking the box and changing things and avoiding, that sag where things are just repeating over and over again. One thing to ask yourself too is maybe it just is too long, right? Maybe it's too long. Maybe you are actually writing a novel. Maybe you're writing a short story. Maybe you're writing a novella, right? Just because you have a story doesn't mean it's a full-length story. So I like this. See, here it is. Sometimes your saggy middle means you don't actually have a middle. Yeah, right? because you are just stretching out something that doesn't really exist. You're like, well, I need more word count. Well, no, obviously that's not a reason to write words. You don't write words just to extend. So if it's a matter of you set up what the main character has to do, there's an obstacle, and then you're like, well, I don't know what to do until they reach the obstacle. Well, then maybe they should just reach the obstacle, and it's a short story. Maybe that's just the scope of what you're talking about. And if it's not, then ask yourself if if you don't want that to be the case, ask yourself if maybe the scope of your story is too small and it could be longer because the scope is bigger. And scope, again, like I said at the beginning, it is not a matter of the whole world is involved or it's scaling to this some incredible magnitude, right? It could be the scope is the psychological scope, like how deep are we getting into the character's motivation or implications or things like that. How dense is this analysis of what is going on? There's nothing wrong with simplistic analysis, right? I love some short stories that don't go into all the whys and wherefores of how the character is thinking, and that's fine. It means that if the author wanted to do that, if the author wanted to just make it longer and just stay at that shallow level, as it were, well, no, it wouldn't work very well. It would be too long. The only way for them to make it longer is by changing the scope of the story and what the story actually is about. You really need to work on knowing when to stop main character plot and setting setup. Yeah, okay. Here's a rule of thumb. If you want to give yourself a hard deadline, think about the type of genre you're writing in. Okay. Look at the average amount of words for some artists that you like in it, and do not let yourself and make yourself transition to that second act, that call to adventure, no later than 25% into whatever that word count is. So if it's 75,000, that would be 25,000 words. If by 25,000 words they have not reached that point, you are pacing too slow. Move faster. And you could say, well, I know this book and it doesn't happen until much later. Sure, but I can also name a lot of books that happens a lot earlier. I'm just saying, and honestly, the earlier you can do it, the better. 10% is getting more common than 25%, at least from what I have observed. So keep that in mind. All right. And remember, the character can learn more. What that pivot point is the promise to the audience that this is what the story is about. And they can know that pretty early on, right? And the character wants to be involved in that story. And again, they can do that very early on. So a lot of this setup may not need to be set up. It might just need to be character background information that we're getting on the fly as they're trying to do what they're setting out to do. Think of how many stories you can think of where at the point in which the character says, yes, I want to join this adventure, you just don't know very much about them. And it's fine because you're very interested in the adventure. There's enough of a setup for you to care. But you learn a lot more about them as it goes, and they're actually having to face the problem. We generally learn much more about people, doing things. It's like practicing writing, right? You can stay up here in the abstract. It's when you actually do the writing that you learn anything, right? So it's the same thing with characters. We don't really need all this abstract information. We need to see them doing things. And so if they're going to be doing things, have them do things and move, not just random things, but story-oriented plot goal things that they start early, if that makes sense. So I'm just going to motivate you. I'm glad that you see that problem. Work on it. It's a huge problem. Now, a lot of things that I mentioned today deal with the concept of maintaining tension. And we do have a narrative tension workshop that's coming up this weekend. I know some of you should have it from checking in daily in the community. If you do not, and you feel like you checked in every day in the community, please let me know and I will sign you up for it. It is this Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern and Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern. There are 2 sessions, but they are the same. So we give you 2 times to come. You don't have to come to both, although you're welcome to do so. Ask questions. And also you can watch the recording later on for sure. You never know until you go drinking with them. I love that. Dialogue. Yes, we've done some dialogue workshops, but yeah, I'll look at putting that on the calendar again for sure. We like to go through our workshops throughout the year as more people join in and things like that. That's great. But yes, the narrative tension workshop going on right now. We also have our short story writing course that we are beginning this evening. So if you would like to shore up your short story, trying to find a good alliteration there, shore up your short story talent, you maybe worked on one because you were following along and you did the short story challenge, and maybe you felt like, hey, I'd like to work on that a little bit more. Go ahead and join us for the short story lab, which is beginning this evening. It is a lot of fun, lots of exercises. It's intense. Some of the audience here were in the last session. I had a great time with them. It was good. We, of course, have other things for our AutoCrit members, other events. We have our fantasy club. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about mixing genres. Now, this is open to anybody who is an AutoCrit Pro member. If you're not an AutoCrit Pro member, you can go to autocrit.com and you can sign up, become a Pro member, and get into any of our clubs. So it's not like a workshop or a course. It's just included in your membership. And the fantasy club tonight is going to be on mixing genres. So what if you aren't just writing fantasy? What if you're writing fantasy romance or fantasy mystery? Or what if it's the opposite? What if you write mystery with a little bit of fantasy or things like that? You loved the short story lab. I loved it too. I'm very excited. I'm very excited to do it again. Love the clubs. Love having you there. Fantastic. You missed last week. Tonight, you tell the family to leave you alone. Wow, that's great. The fantasy club is at 7 p.m. I know it was at 8 p.m., but we have moved. We used to have it at 7 p.m., and then we moved to 8. We're moving it back to 7 p.m. Eastern. So don't miss it. We're moving back. We were told a lot that we were told by the community in general you wanted it back. So I hope I made the right call. 7 p.m. Eastern, fantasy. Check it out. We're going to talk about genre tomorrow. Oh, jellyfish? Yeah, I made this shirt. Isn't it cool? Jellyfish. I love jellyfish. Horror. Yes. The Horror Club with Gareth at 6 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday. Every week, we also have the Accountability Club at 11 a.m. So on Mondays, 11 a.m. Eastern. Is the short story lab the same material? Yes, it is the same slides. Now, I don't go off of a strict script, so you can probably tell when I talk. So it will be a little bit different, but and of course, you know, the interaction will be different. But yes, it is the same. It is the same material. All right. So for those of you who, like I said, are not AutoCrit members, you can definitely sign up. Become a member, have access to all these clubs. I mean, with just the 3 clubs every week, that's 12 clubs a month. And that's a lot of material, a lot of things that you can use to interact with everybody. And then, of course, we have the Writer's Desk as part of being an AutoCrit Pro member. Something I want to talk about with the Writer's Desk. Some of you might have noticed that we launched a little bit of a beta recently on some new features for the AutoCrit Writing Desk. We're not get ready to fully reveal all about that. There is some more development going on, but I'll put a little bit of a tease that it will tie into the next challenge. The next challenge is beginning next week. Somebody is saying that it might be showing 8 p.m. Eastern in the calendar. I will make sure that is updated because it should have pivoted. So don't worry, it is 7 p.m. And I will get that adjusted if it's incorrectly written there on the site. No worries. More clubs for specific genres. We are thinking about that. Yes. And evening accountability. Yes. Some of you already participated in a survey we were releasing. We released it at a member-only event a little while ago. It's on the community page as well, on the community forum. There will be an email sent out. I know I've mentioned it before, but there will be an email sent out. So please keep an eye on your email if you are on the AutoCrit list, you know, if you have joined in, if you've ever signed up for anything, and let us know what kind of clubs you would like to see and what time. because, we can guess. We can guess what kind of clubs people might be interested in based on what genres are hot. We can guess on what kind of time based on where we think people are, but you will be our best resource for that. And we want to do these for you. Of course, that's the whole point. So please go ahead and fill that out when you get it. It'll be sometime this week. Well, mystery thriller club. That sounds like fun. Do we know how many entries we got? I do. I don't want to reveal that just yet. However, we still are on track to reveal the winners by the end of this month. So if you came in because of that challenge and you're like, what's going on with the challenge? We have received the entries. There are a lot of entries, and we will be diligently going through them quickly but carefully, and we should reveal later on. Yes, it should be revealed to it should be awarded to if you checked in daily. If you do not see it, Samantha, and you checked in daily, please let me know, because you should be signed up for it. If you checked in daily on the email, that was a different thing. That was just for the forum. Sorry, it was two different check-ins. The check-in daily for the emails was for the grab bag prizes. If it was in the forum, then you automatically got the workshop. Is there going to be an official post? Yeah, somebody brought that up. I'll get onto that right after I get off of this, and I will put that in. You need that delicious data. I love data. It's like a short circuit. Input, more input. All right. Well, I will see you all around the AutoCrate community. Please keep the conversation going. You can always join me in the forum and give me any feedback you need there as well. And I will see you around. Please like, subscribe, hit the bell if you're joining us on the YouTube side of things. And we will see you around. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us.